I'll tell you this much. What happened in my kitchen that evening still makes my heart flutter in a way I didn't expect at 60. If you're watching, tell me which city you're joining us from. I love imagining where everyone is listening from. And if you feel like staying with me through this little journey of mine, don't be shy about subscribing or tapping that like button. It encourages me more than you know. Now, let me take a breath, because this story surprised even me. The house had finally quieted down after my son's small gathering. You know that moment when the last coat sweeps off the hanger, when the door shuts, and the air settles like a sigh. I'd spent the afternoon bustling around, making snacks, wiping counters that didn't need wiping, offering drinks the boys could easily get themselves. It's not that they needed me. It's just a habit that sticks after decades of motherhood. But now the evening felt like it was finally mine. I stood alone in the kitchen, rinsing glasses under warm water, listening to the soft ticking of the old wall clock. My back ached in that familiar way, the kind of ache that simply confirms you've lived a full life. I stretched, exhaling into the empty room, ready for quiet, when I heard footsteps returning down the hallway. I turned, half expecting it to be my son coming back for something he forgot. But instead it was Daniel, his longtime friend. Tall, warm-eyed, always polite in that way young men rarely are anymore. He'd grown from a lanky teenager into the kind of man who carried himself with an easy steadiness. I'd noticed it before, in harmless, passing ways. Tonight, though, the way he lingered in the doorway felt different. He smiled, almost apologetically. "Mrs. Hale, I didn't want to leave without thanking you again. You always take care of everyone." There was something sincere in his voice, something that softened me instantly. "Oh, nonsense," I said, waving a damp hand. "You all know where the fridge is. I just keep myself busy." He stepped farther inside, hands in his pockets, eyes drifting around the kitchen like he was remembering something. "It always feels peaceful here," he said, "even when we were kids. I think that's why all of us liked hanging out at your place so much." The comment warmed me more than it should have. I felt a small, quiet pride, one of those feelings that settle deep in the chest when you realize you offered something meaningful without even knowing it. I went back to drying the glasses, aware of him standing close enough that I could sense his presence. Not invading, not pressing, just there, and oddly comforting. "You really stayed behind just to say thank you?" I teased lightly. He hesitated before answering, and that pause told me there was more beneath the surface. "Well, that, and I wanted to check on you. You looked a little tired earlier." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I'm 60, Daniel. I think I'm allowed to look tired." "Yes," he said, and his voice gentled in a way that made me look up. "But you also looked like you were carrying more than just trays of sandwiches." The words caught me off guard. Men my age rarely noticed things like that. And yet here he was, someone decades younger than me, looking at me as if he could rate the small cracks I kept neatly plastered over. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the warmth lingering from the evening. Maybe it was simply the kindness in his expression. But something in me loosened. "I suppose I've just been feeling a little invisible lately," I admitted quietly, surprised by my own honesty. "It happens as you get older. People stop seeing you, even when you're standing right in front of them." Daniel's eyes softened. "I see you," he said gently. "More than you think." Those 3 words landed deep, the way truth sometimes does, soft but undeniable. I felt a flutter in my chest, unexpected and strangely youthful, like the echo of a feeling I hadn't entertained in a long time. He stepped beside me, close enough that our shoulders nearly brushed. He reached for a towel and began drying the remaining glasses without being asked. It was such a simple gesture, but something about it struck me. Quiet, thoughtful, almost intimate in its innocence. For a moment we worked silently, the kitchen lit only by the warm under-cabinet glow. His presence settled the room, and oddly, it settled something in me too. When I finally spoke, my voice was softer than before. "You didn't have to stay." "I know," he said, turning toward me just enough that our eyes met again. "But I wanted to." And just like that, the night shifted. A small, almost imperceptible shift, but I felt it. A heat beneath calm water. A current under stillness. Nothing inappropriate, nothing rushed, just an emotional nearness blooming where I least expected it. And in that quiet kitchen, with dishes stacked neatly and moonlight brushing the window, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't invisible at all. Not tonight. Not to him. The moment lingered between us, gentle but charged in a way I couldn't quite name. I leaned my hip against the counter, letting the warmth of the room settle into my shoulders. The evening outside had deepened into that soft indigo that comes just before full night, and the kitchen lights cast a mellow glow across Daniel's face as he finished drying the last glass. He set it down carefully, almost thoughtfully, before turning toward me again. "You really do put everyone else first," he said, "even when you don't have to." I shrugged lightly, though his words touched somewhere tender. "It's just who I am, I suppose. Old habits." "But habits can change," he replied, "even the old ones." There was something in his tone, something patient, something warm, something that made me straighten just slightly. Not because I felt nervous, but because I felt present, more present than I had in a long time, like the world had shifted its focus back onto me. I gestured toward the living room. "Sit for a moment if you want. You don't have to rush out. It's late anyway, and the roads get dark around here." He hesitated only a second before nodding. "I'd like that." I made us both tea, an old ritual of mine, quiet and calming. As the kettle hummed, I became aware of how still the house was. No footsteps overhead, no voices, just the steady simmer of water and Daniel leaning against the doorway, watching me with an expression that wasn't intrusive, but attentive. "You know," I said, breaking the quiet, "I remember when you first came over. You were so shy you barely said 10 words. Daniel laughed under his breath. "I remember that. I was terrified of saying something stupid around your son." "You never did," I said. "You were always polite, always kind." He looked down for a moment, running a hand across the back of his neck. I wasn't just trying to impress him. The statement hung in the air, subtle yet unmistakably intentional. My heart gave a small, startled thud, not from fear, no, but from recognition. Recognition of the way he was choosing to speak to me. Recognition of the way he saw me, not as someone's mother, not as a background figure, but as a woman standing right in front of him. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water over the tea leaves, giving myself a moment to breathe. When I handed him his cup, our fingers grazed. Barely. Light as a whisper, but enough that I felt a warmth trail up my arm. He noticed it too. I could see it in the slight lift of his brows, the breath he drew in a little deeper than before. But he didn't move away. If anything, he softened, the tension easing from his frame like he was settling into the moment rather than retreating from it. We sat across from one another at the small kitchen table. The wooden surface was worn in places, smoothed by decades of elbows and coffee cups and conversations both heavy and light. Tonight, it felt like an anchor, steadying the quiet that wrapped around us. "How long has it been since someone really listened to you?" Daniel asked suddenly, not accusingly, just gently. It took me a moment to answer, not because I didn't know, but because the truth pressed on me with surprising weight. "A long time," I admitted, "longer than I care to say out loud." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than I'd shared. "You deserve to be heard, to be seen. You always have." The sincerity in his voice stirred something deep inside me, something old, something cautious, something longing to be acknowledged after years of being tucked away. At 60, you get used to being strong, practical, reliable. But you also get used to feeling overlooked. Daniel leaned forward a little, elbows on the table, his tea untouched. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever known," he said softly. "You give so much. You hold everyone together. But who holds you?" No one had asked me that in decades. I didn't have an answer. Not a real one. I looked at him, really looked at him. The steady gaze, the gentleness in his expression, the patience in the way he waited for me to speak. There was no rush in him, no expectation, just presence. "You don't have to carry everything alone," he added, his voice low but firm. "Not when someone cares." The words settled over me like a warm blanket, unexpected, comforting, and profoundly real. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in my chest loosen, perhaps for the first time in years. "Daniel," I said quietly, I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. He offered a small smile, soft, reassuring, and deeply respectful. I meant every word. The air between us shifted again, not into something dangerous, but something meaningful. Something rooted in understanding. Something human. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the windows. Inside, our tea cooled untouched. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the night wasn't ending. It was beginning. The tea between us had long since cooled, but neither of us seemed to notice. The quiet stretched in that gentle way that feels intentional, not awkward, like both of us were listening for something unspoken, something rising softly beneath the surface of our words. I folded my hands around the warm mug and let my eyes drift toward the window. The moon hung low and pale, casting a faint silver glow across the yard. It made the old oak tree look almost painted, its branches swaying lazily in the night breeze. I'd always loved that view. Tonight, though, I felt it more deeply, as if I were seeing it with new eyes. "You look peaceful," Daniel said quietly. "I don't think I've seen you sit still this long." I gave a small laugh. "Neither have I, to be honest. I'm always buzzing around doing something. Fixing, cleaning, planning, you name it. You don't have to fill every silence," he said gently. I turned my gaze back to him, and there was something there, something steady, something patient, something grounding. The kind of presence you don't realize you've been missing until it's sitting right in front of you. "I suppose I'm still learning that," I admitted. "When you spend years taking care of everyone else, you forget how to just be." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe tonight is a chance to remember." He wasn't wrong. The room felt different somehow, not larger, not smaller, but more alive. Or maybe it was me who felt more alive. It had been a long time since someone looked at me the way he was looking at me now, not as an obligation, not as a figure in the background, but as a person with her own quiet stories and forgotten desires. He reached across the table slowly, not boldly, not presumptuously, but with a kind of quiet invitation. His fingers brushed against mine, warm and steady. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my hands soften beneath his touch. "You have this calm strength about you," he said. "I've always admired it, even when I was younger. I just never knew how to say it." My breath hitched for a moment, not from shock, but from the tenderness in his voice. The honesty. It wasn't the voice of a boy with a passing admiration. It was the voice of a man who saw me, really saw me. "I didn't know you felt that way," I whispered. Daniel's thumb moved gently along the side of my hand, tracing the shape of it with quiet reverence. "I didn't know how to show it, and I didn't want to disrespect you, or make you uncomfortable." "You haven't," I said softly. "Not at all." A small smile curved at the corners of his mouth. "Good," We sat like that for a while, hands lightly touching, breaths steady, hearts settling into a rhythm that felt strangely synchronous. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overwhelming. It was gentle, warm, deeply human. It felt like being seen after years of passing unnoticed. Eventually, I stood to refill the kettle, partly to give myself a moment to steady the flutter inside my chest. When I turned back around, Daniel was watching me with an expression that was impossible to misinterpret, not inappropriate, not heavy, but undeniably filled with respect and something tender beneath it. "You look different tonight," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you finally let someone else share the weight." I leaned against the counter, letting his words wash over me. Maybe I did. He rose from his chair and stepped closer. Not too close, not crossing any boundaries, but close enough that the air between us thickened with quiet understanding. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair gently behind my ear. The touch was soft, almost hesitant, but it sent a warmth through me that I hadn't felt in years. "You don't have to go through life feeling unseen," he said. "Not when there's someone who notices everything about you." I felt my throat tighten, but not from sadness. From gratitude, from rediscovery, from the unexpected beauty of being valued, not for what I did, but for who I was. My voice came out low, barely above a whisper. "Daniel, I don't know where any of this is going." "You don't have to know," he replied. "We can just be here. Right now. That's enough." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The night deepened around us, the house sighing softly with its familiar creaks, but the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt full, full of possibility, full of something blooming between us, slowly, respectfully, deeply. Something I hadn't expected, but something I didn't want to let slip away. The house felt warmer than it had in years, as though the walls themselves were soaking in the quiet closeness between us. Daniel still stood near me, close enough that I could feel the gentle steadiness of his presence, yet far enough that his respect was unmistakable. It was a delicate balance he held effortlessly, one I hadn't realized I needed so deeply. I breathed in slowly, letting the comfort of the moment settle into my bones. Life had been loud for so long, responsibilities, expectations, the constant hum of caring for others, while tucking my own needs away like folded linens in a drawer. Tonight, that drawer had finally opened. "Do you ever think," I began softly, "that we get so used to routines that we forget who we were before them?" Daniel's eyes warmed with recognition. "All the time. Maybe that's why some moments feel so important. They remind us we're still alive, still growing." I looked at him, really looked, at the sincerity in his face, at the kindness I'd always known was there, at the man he'd become, steady, attentive, patient in ways that felt strangely rare in the world now. "You helped me remember something tonight," I said quietly. "Something I hadn't realized I'd misplaced along the way." "What's that?" he asked gently. "That I'm more than what I've given to others. I'm allowed to feel things too, to want things, to step into moments instead of just watching them pass." He nodded, as though he understood each word before I even finished speaking. "You deserve that," he said. "You deserve someone to pour into you for once." A soft laugh escaped me, not from humor, but from the surprising tenderness of his words. "I don't know how long it's been since anyone tried." "Then maybe tonight can be the first time in a while," he said. "And it doesn't have to be anything complicated. It can just be this, being honest, being human." The simplicity of that truth settled over me with a gentle weight. No pressure, no rushing, just two people sharing a moment neither of us expected. I turned away briefly to switch off the kitchen light, leaving only the dim glow from the hallway. The shadows softened the room, making it feel even more intimate, but in a safe, grounded way, like the calm that follows a long-held breath finally released. Daniel stepped closer, only enough that his voice dropped naturally into a softer register. "If you ever need someone to talk to," he said, "or someone to sit with you at the end of a long day, I'd be honored to be that person." The sincerity in his tone touched something old in me, something that had been waiting patiently for years to be acknowledged. I placed my hand lightly on his forearm, a gentle, grateful touch. "You already are," I said. He exhaled, a slow and steady breath, and I felt the tension in his body ease beneath my fingers. Not tension of discomfort, but the kind that comes when someone cares deeply and finally feels understood. We walked to the front door together, not hurriedly, but with a quiet sense of completion. When he turned to face me, the porch light cast a soft halo around him, making his expression even more open, more honest. "I'm glad I stayed," he said. "So am I." He hesitated, then reached for my hand again, lifting it gently, respectfully, almost reverently. He didn't kiss it. He didn't cross any lines. He simply held it for a moment, allowing the warmth between us to say what words didn't need to. "Good night," he murmured. "Good night, Daniel." I watched him walk down the path, his silhouette drifting into the silver-touched darkness. The night air was cool, but inside me something glowed warm and bright, something rediscovered, something awakened. When I closed the door behind me, the house didn't feel empty. It felt renewed, different, alive. I stood in the quiet entryway, touching the place on my hand where his had been. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't dared let myself feel. Hope. Not the loud, sweeping kind, the gentle kind, the kind that whispers there is still more life left to live, more connection to experience, more chapters waiting to be written, even at 60. Maybe especially at 60. And as I walked back into the soft glow of the kitchen, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The night he stayed behind changed me, not into someone new, but back into someone I'd almost forgotten. Someone visible. Someone valued. Someone alive. And that, I realized, was the beginning of a story all its own.